When I was 7 years old, I was told that I was going blind. And that's because I failed the kindergarten eye chart, which basically started this 1.5-year hunt to figure out what the hell had happened to my eyesight. And I ended up in a doctor's office with my mom, who's sitting somewhere here. And we're sitting there with the doctor. The doctor walks in and says that I have a condition called Stargardt's disease. Stargardt's disease is a juvenile form of macular degeneration where you lose your center vision over time, but you keep your peripheral vision a little bit like the way we would see this TED logo right here. And the doctor looked at my mother, looked at me and said, "Your son's going to lose his eyesight. Take him home, teach him Braille, and give him a magnifier."
And 5 years later, I had the exact same conversation with the same doctor.
But, you know, it actually wasn't such a sad day because my parents grabbed me. They said, "Enough of this. Let's go have some fun." We went and got a bunch of ice cream, went to the video store, rented Homeward Bound, great classic movie. I remember thinking I wanted to actually lose my eyesight every single day. It was one of the best days we ever had.
Our actual experience was slightly different. I got Air Bud 2, Golden Receiver, fantastic film. But our parents actually sat us down and they told us a piece of advice at that time. They said, maybe you're not going to have the best eyes, but you were given more brains instead. And to this day, I don't think that's true, but it is a fantastic lie to tell to a little kid. But actually a few months ago, I got to ask my parents again what they meant by that, because we've grown up with those words in our head. And what they told me was amazing. They told us that visual impairment never was going to be an excuse in our lives, and that it was never going to dictate our lives.
So when I was in my first day of first grade, I'm standing at the chalkboard about 2 feet away because I'd promised my mother that morning that if I couldn't see something on the board, I would get up out of my seat and go to the board to see it. And I remember doing that and then turning around and feeling all the eyes of the class on me and thinking maybe for the first time, you know, I was a little bit different. And I sat down at my desk and really dreaded having to go do that again. And I remember thinking that promise that I made my mother wasn't exactly so simple. That day at lunch, you know, kids would come up and they would say, "Can you see?" And I would defensively say, "Yes." And then there's this one little jerk, this guy, Mike White, that came up to me and he said, "Well, if you can see, how many fingers am I holding up?" And I actually couldn't see it. And I remember thinking at that moment something was wrong. As an aside, after living with this question my entire life, for some reason, everybody always holds up 2 fingers. So it's actually a pretty easy question to answer.
And for the next 8 years, this happened. We were 2 feet from a chalkboard and 2 inches from a textbook. But on my first day of high school, I didn't want to be the blind kid anymore. So I sat at the very back of the room. And on that day, my teacher, Dr. Folo, calls on me, "Brian, can you please do this problem?" And mind you, I'd been visually impaired for years now, so I developed an entire skill set on how to trick my teachers into telling me what was on the board so I could appear sighted to everyone else in the room. Well, my first strategy, always ambiguity. "What problem exactly, Dr. Fulham?" And that didn't work, so I went with, "What numbers exactly are we talking about up there? Lots going on." And so he looks at me and just says, "These." Not a problem, I've been through this before. And the second strategy was play dumb, because at that time for me, being blind was worse than being dumb. So, "I'm sorry, Dr. Folo, I just don't know how to do it. I don't know." And he looks back at me and says, "Why? It's simple division." And then my third strategy, which I didn't really get a chance to use, it works better when you're reading in a circle. You wait till it gets to about 3 kids from you, and then you kindly excuse yourself to the bathroom. But that day, none of my strategies worked. And as my head fell slowly to the desk, I had to admit to Dr. Folo, I had to admit to my class, and I had to admit to myself that I couldn't do the problem because I couldn't see it. And that my strategy of hiding and avoidance was only creating shame around my visual impairment. And then I realized that nothing could feel worse than that moment. So we had to adopt a brand new strategy. We had to embrace visual impairment and do what my parents told me, thank God you're over there, that we were never going to let it dictate our lives.
And so when I was 16, that meant Brian and I stealing our parents' car. And at least that's what I'm claiming was the reason. But we were sitting at home in the summer of 2002, and my parents were gone. We had the car, we had the keys. We had enough vision to see the road, not enough vision to see everything on it. So I got into the driver's seat, and I put Brian in the passenger seat and gave him a pair of binoculars. And there was a pool about 5 miles away that we wanted to go to. We drove very nervously that 5 miles, and we did make it to the pool. And it's funny because I don't really remember why it was so important to go to the pool that day, and I actually don't even really remember the ride back, which I'm sure was just as treacherous. But what did kind of stand out to me is that for the first time, I was on my schedule in a way that I had never expected to be, that I had an independence to something that was sort of completely ruled out for me, as small as it was. And it kind of suggested to me at that time that some rules could be bent and other rules could be broken.
And Brad doesn't get enough credit here. I had my eyes closed the entire time, so it was all him. But we didn't kill ourselves in any car accidents, so we got into college. And when I got to University of Virginia, like many students, I signed up for Spanish as my language credit. And I was terrible at it, just awful. Like no bueno at all. And so like any diligent college student, I buckled down and petitioned the University of Virginia to allow Braille as a language instead of Spanish. I'd been taking it since I was like 7 years old. So next thing I know, I'm sitting in front of a panel of 3 deans arguing the efficacies of visual impairment versus hearing impairment as it relates to Braille and American Sign Language. I was a bit in over my head, and ultimately, turns out that Braille is considered a code, not a language, and they said, please go back to Spanish class, adios, that's a free one. But in that moment, all I was really trying to do was just leverage my strength, which was from visual impairment learning Braille. And so when I finally got into the working world, I tried to do the same thing. So what am I best at? And it was strangers, because with our vision, we can't recognize who anybody is. So we treat them like friends until we can figure that out, but it can be a rough 5 minutes. But what happened was I thought, well, sales is making strangers friends. And it was shocking to me because when I started working, people were so afraid to go up to somebody or make a call. But for me, it was the same thing as just going to the office that morning. Everybody was just a stranger until I got to chat with them. And I started to realize that maybe visual impairment was giving me a couple more gifts than I'd ever given it credit for.
And while Brian was using his golden sales mouth, I was working in business development for an investment company.
Boring.
And it actually was really boring. But what we were doing, we were both in New York, and we're hanging out one day, and we get very, very excited about this kid. His name is Yannick Douay, and the reason we were so fascinated with him is he was actually born nearly blind, grew up reading Braille, and now his eyesight is restored. And the reason for that is because of a brand new gene therapy that is going to be approved for his condition. He was an early patient this coming January. And when we looked into it, we realized that this cure actually started with a small charitable gift to a researcher that gave that project a chance to succeed. And when you looked a little further, you realize with all the medical advancements going on, there are actually hundreds of researchers in the same situation. A lot of them could use that one charitable gift to give their life-changing project that exact same chance.
So one day, Brad and I are walking around New York, and we stop into Bloomingdale's to do a little bit of shopping. And I don't know if any of you are aware of this, but when you're visually impaired and you go shopping, it is an absolute nightmare. You can't see sizes, you can't see labels, you can't see prices. Colors are a huge issue. So we take the 5-year-old approach. We just run around and rub everything.
He always does that. It's not necessary for the talk, but...
Shirt, not you. Shirt, not you. So, and what we do is when we ultimately come across something we like under our hand, we then do all the investigation to figure out exactly what it is. So 45 minutes later, Brad and I both walk out. And as we are pulling out what we purchased, we realized we got the exact same shirt. And we laughed about that for a minute because it was hilarious. But then we realized it was because we had actually both loved the touch and the feel of it. And then, like a light bulb in a cartoon, we realized this could be our way to give back. We could make amazing clothing and then donate 100% of the profits back to those researchers who just needed a chance to cure blindness.
We'll take it.
Yeah.
We'll take it.
That feels good.
So that's when we started our clothing project, Two Blind Brothers. And we really wanted to start it with all those grand, lofty ideals that we had. We were going to give back to the research. We were going to be out in front of vision impairment, bring awareness to the cause. We were going to create clothing that reflected the values that we cared about. The problem was when we started that nobody else cared about it at all. So we made about 1,000 shirts and spent the first month just begging good friends to buy them, which is actually a lot harder than you would think. But we at that same time, we made a video on our story and our mission, and we put it out on Facebook. And that night when we put it out, we went to bed and we woke up and there were all these notifications on our phone. I wake up the next morning and I checked the first notification. It was from a coworker of mine. It's a text message and it just read, "Dude, just saw you on the internet, wow." Which actually terrified me because I didn't know what he was talking about. Some inappropriate photo somewhere, but...
Just haven't found it yet, babe. They're still looking.
But our video had started to spread, and a few million views on that video later, people were buying the shirts, people were talking about the cause, and we were starting to get this awareness. Around that time, we actually found a group called the Dallas Lighthouse for the Blind. We contracted with them to set up manufacturing so that our clothes would be made by the blind and the visually impaired. So we were rocking and rolling, and then we started to get some interesting media inquiries that started to help spread awareness about the cause, let us get out there, talk about the mission. And then on January 4th of this year, we had the sincere pleasure to sit down with this woman, Ellen DeGeneres. That's cool.
And let me tell you, that was one of the single greatest days of a younger brother's life. Years of torment, I get to make fun of him on national television. Are you kidding me? But that was an incredible day, but we actually started to receive messages like these. And we had the good fortune of actually getting on the phone with this mother and daughter. And we realized that we had the opportunity that we all dream of to go back in time and tell a younger version of ourselves a little piece of advice. And this girl wanted to quit playing soccer because she wasn't that she couldn't see the ball. She had actually made the team. She was just really scared that she would embarrass herself in front of all of her friends. And Brad and I spent about 45 minutes just telling all of the times that we'd embarrassed ourselves and just had a fantastic time just laughing with them. And 2 weeks later, we actually got another message from this same woman that her daughter had started playing soccer again. And in that moment, we realized that not only were we going to be able to make shirts and give money to charity, but we were actually going to get to join people on their success journeys through visual impairment.
So that's our story. And when we think back to 25 years ago, when we're in that doctor's office, it's essentially the roughest news you think you could get. But the big irony is that vision impairment has actually given more to us than it's taken away. It's forced us to learn real skills. How to deal with strangers, how to take on social pressure, stand up in front of people. It's taught us mindsets, like how to think creatively about a problem, how to just be a little bit more resilient to rejection. It's given us the gift of this project and everything that comes with it, the community, the research, the excitement, the families. Your greatest challenge is your greatest gift. We wouldn't be standing here without ours. Thank you.
Thank you, Ted.
Thank you. Thank you.